Good afternoon, everyone. I am Maritza Adonis, and I serve as the Global Advocacy and Diplomacy Working Group Chair for WCAPS, which is the Women of Color Advancing Peace, Security, and Conflict Transformation. Welcome to our 8th session of our 9-part series on Foreign Service Officers, Debunking the Myth, Introductory to the Foreign Service. I would like to give a quick shout out to Diplomat Kearney. She actually joined us at one of our very first sessions. And so I really appreciate you for sticking with us. I mean, even when she was not joining us in session, she was making sure she sent some amazing diplomats that could cover the different cones. So if this is your first session with us, we are actually going to have a December watch party. I think it's the second week of December for Global Advocacy and Diplomacy Working Group, where we will replay all of the 9 sessions. So we won't have the link to this public if you're not a member of WCAPS, but if you'd like to watch it, we'll have a watch party where we'll put them on one by one. So you guys can catch some of the great information that we were able to receive from amazing diplomats across the globe. So the series actually started off with a debunking the myths, where we just talked about the field in general, followed by a session that covered all 5 cones. And then we went into the FSOT, the Foreign Service Officer Test. And then now we're having this session that's introducing you all to a variety of diplomat careers in the State Department generally. And then we'll close off next month with our final session on mentors, sponsors, and advocates of women of color diplomats. And this will be a representation of various allies who have different organizations, and they'll talk about how they've been intentional about supporting women of color in the service. And so today we have 3 outstanding specialists and one of my favorite diplomats, well, one of my favorite foreign service officers. You guys will learn that everyone here is a diplomat. It's one of the myths we'll debunk, or our foreign service officer Kearney will debunk in a little bit. We will introduce our panels for today. And before we do that, we always do a quick roll call just to get an idea of where everyone is joining us from. And I see Ghana is in the chat box. I always love to see our international folks that are joining us with GAD. We have folks from Ethiopia, Maryland, Vanessa from DC. I know this is some of our HU folks because we have Diplomat Kearney as one of our distinguished diplomats for today. We have folks in lots of DMV, Virginia, Dallas, Texas. Welcome, welcome. Maryland, DC. All right, looks like we have a lot of home team that's joining us today. So thank you all for coming on board. So today's program, as I mentioned, is not going to focus on foreign service officers per se. So we do have our Diplomat-In-Residence Foreign Service Officer, Kearney, who's going to be here. And so we'll give an opportunity towards the end to answer some of those questions about FSO. We're actually going to focus on other diplomats within the State Department. So the first diplomat that I would like to introduce is Diplomat Clifton Jeffrey. So Diplomat Clifton Jeffrey is a supervisory special agent in the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, also known as DS. DS is the Federal Law Enforcement Security Bureau of the United States Department of State. Most recently, Diplomat Jeffrey served as the resident agent in charge of the DS New Orleans resident office, where he oversaw criminal investigations and other DS operations throughout Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. Prior to joining the Department of State, Diplomat Jeffrey practiced law, shout out to my fellow attorneys, in Jackson, Mississippi. He joined the Foreign Service in 2007 and has served at diplomatic posts abroad in Pakistan, Botswana, Iraq, Eritrea, and Syria. He also has served domestically in Houston, Boston, Massachusetts, New Orleans, Louisiana, and has been the recipient of several Department of State awards, to include a Heroism Award, multiple Meritorious Honor Awards, and being named 2019 DS Special Agent of the Year. Congratulations, diplomat. He holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science from Tougaloo College and a Juris Doctorate from Mississippi College School of Law. Diplomat Clifton also served in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserves and U.S. Army Reserves. He is currently enrolled in a 10-month Arabic language program in preparation for his upcoming assignment as the Deputy Regional Security Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, Egypt. Welcome, Diplomat Jeffries. How are you doing today?
I'm well. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. It was such an honor to have you. Next, I will introduce Specialist Diplomat Notomo. Diplomat Notomo joined the Foreign Service in May of 2012. He has previously worked for the Department of the Army as an IT technician and served the same organization as a soldier for 10 years. Thank you for your service. His assignments to date include Romania, South Korea, Italy, Germany, Sri Lanka, Croatia, France, and he's currently with us live from Japan. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Networks and Design Management from Western Governors University, along with the Master of Science in Information Assurance from the same school. He is currently a semester from completing his Master of Science in Information Technology from Florida State University. Go Hurricanes. His IT certifications include CISSP, CCSP, CCNA, MCSC, CH, CHFI, and several others. He's currently working in Tokyo, Japan as one of the secure private cloud administrators for all Department of State's interests in Asia Pacific. Thank you so much, Diplomat Notomo, for joining us live from Japan. How are you doing today?
Ohio gozaimasu, as they say here in Japan. Good morning. I'm doing fine. It was a pleasure to be invited to join the panelist of specialists to speak on what we do in the Department of State. So yeah, I look forward to sharing my experience.
It's a pleasure to have you. Next, I'll introduce Diplomat Walker. Diplomat Walker joined the Department of State as an office management specialist in 2005 and has served in 6 diplomatic missions in 4 geographic bureaus. Prior to joining the Foreign Service, Diplomat Walker studied English literature at Boston University and worked as a human resources assistant and recruiter for the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. Diplomat Walker is currently enjoying her first Washington, D.C., welcome to the district, Washington, D.C. tour and enjoys spending time with family in her home state of Florida. Love the Floridian connections here. Welcome, Diplomat Walker. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
And last, but certainly not least, distinguished diplomat, Foreign Service Officer, Yolanda Kearney. Dr. Yolanda Kearney joined the United States Marine Corps as a Foreign Service Officer in 2004. She served as Consul for Public Affairs at the United States Embassy in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Public Affairs Officer at the U.S. Mission in Barbados, the Eastern Caribbean, and the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, Public Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Jamaica, Cultural Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy in the Republic of Cameroon, and Economic Officer and Chief Counsel at the U.S. Embassy in the Republic of Guinea. She is a recipient of several Department of State Meritorious Honor and Superior Honor Awards and the Lloyd Roy Award for Excellence in Cultural Diplomacy. Dr. Kearney is a proud alumna of HU, Howard University, from which she earned undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral degrees in music history and literature and religious studies. Before joining the Foreign Service, she served as a music historian at the United States Library of Congress. Welcome, distinguished Diplomat Kearney. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me and for having, I will quote Kanye, my friends are dope and my friends do dope things. So thank you for having us so that we can tell you what it means to be a diplomat in the State Department and what the options are for WCAP members and harder than that.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to have you part of our program. So we actually have you start us off, Diplomat. Kearney, since you are a diplomat in residence and you have a plethora of experience across almost, I think, all the cones for the service. And so you would have a great vast knowledge, not only on the Foreign Service itself, but on diplomats at state generally. So from your experience as a resident diplomat, can you walk us through the recruitment phase of what it looks like to become a Foreign Service specialist and maybe some differences between an FSO Foreign Service officer and a Foreign Service specialist? I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, thank you. So for the 5 career tracks for Foreign Service officers, consular, economic, public diplomacy, my own career track, political and management, we are focused largely on policy. That's what most people tend to think of when you say, you know, oh, that's a diplomat, which is cool. Policy is fine. But it's really important to know about the 19 career tracks for Foreign Service Specialists. So they're in, they're in 8 sort of broad categories: administration, construction engineering, facility management, information technology, international information and English language programs, law enforcement and security, and then medical and health. So, and office management, how could I forget? I joked earlier that when we served together in Jamaica, that on a few occasions, more than a few occasions, Janelle kept me from getting fired. So we'll let her share some of those stories. But the entry process for Foreign Service officers is straightforward, right? It's sit the Foreign Service officer test, offered 3 times a year, February, June, and October. If you get invited to the oral assessment, you sit the oral assessment. Depending on what your score is, you may receive an invitation to become an officer. Good for you. However, for Foreign Service Specialists, because there are 19 career tracks and very specific requirements for each of them, the processes and the hiring authorities are slightly different for each of them. So I'm happy to have representatives from 3 of those 8 broad categories, so we can talk about it a little bit. There are some age requirements that that apply for law enforcement, for example, that don't for some of the other career tracks. So we'll just talk a little bit about what everybody does. So I will not touch on IT, office management, or security this evening, because these 3 amazing diplomats are going to talk about that. But I do want to start, just to start us off with some understanding of what's available, by talking about administration. So the 3 specialist tracks under administration are financial management officers, our general service officers, and our human resources officers. So if you know amazing accountants who don't mind working in countries where the exchange rate may fluctuate 2, 3, 4, 5, 15 times a day against the dollar, then, and people who enjoy that, there may be a place for you. Our financial management officers develop the budgets for the entire mission and our financial plans. They control all the obligations and expenditures that embassies will carry out. And even the smallest embassy is going to have budgets that are into the several millions of dollars. They prepare and audit payment vouchers for the various parts of the mission. They administer all of our payroll plans. They approve salary and allowance payments, and they monitor all of our cash operations. So again, all those folks who really like to get down in the weeds when it comes to accounting, financial management officer as a track may be something that interests you. Our general service officers manage the physical resources of the mission. They provide logistical functions. They are responsible for procurement and contracting. As you might imagine, even when it comes to toilet tissue for an embassy, who's buying that, up to all the other major expenditures. Warehouse operations rest under our general service officers. All of the inventory and property are leasing services, travel and transportation. As you might imagine, folks are coming and going within the country that we're accredited to, and back and forth to the United States. All of our motor pool and vehicle maintenance and our space management is all handled by general service officers. So frequently when I talk with veterans who have worked in logistics, they get really excited when we start talking about general services, because that's where the meat of it is. And then the last part of administration is our human resources officers. So these are the people who are responsible for all of the recruitment at our embassies and our consulates, our missions abroad. They're responsible for employee training and development, obviously for performance management, employee relations, salary and benefit administration, all of our employee policies and procedures. All of that rests under the human resources officer. So those are some just general overviews. I want us to mix it up a little bit. And what I'd like to do is have Drew talk about all the things that are information technology.
Thank you very much for that. So there are several facets in the world of information technology within the State Department. I'm only one subset, which is known as an IMS. To the extent that you think of information technology within the Department of State as broad, overreaching, the IMS pretty much tackles every facet. We also have finer specialists, honed cones within the information technology bracket. We've got information management technology specialists who deal with unified communications, meaning your general IT infrastructure when you think of servers, routers, switches, communications in that respect. And also in that umbrella, they also deal with telephonic communications like PBX, main switching, telephone switching. They deal with large data pipes. To those who know what I'm talking about, hopefully I'm not geeking anyone out. And then we also have the IMTSs, Information Management Technical Specialists, who deal with radio communications. And prior to joining the State Department, I personally did not really view radio as being a very important part of telecommunications because I come from a strictly more conventional IT background, think servers, computers, and what have you. But since joining the Department of State and working in concert with diplomatic security, it became very, very clear that in cases of emergencies in foreign countries where they control access to everything, I mean, any kind of communicating infrastructure that comes into the country, they control. When they shut everything down, they cannot shut down radio. So radio is a very, very pivotal part of how we communicate and how we talk across the globe, frankly speaking. We have a VHF radio that goes from, say, for instance, from here in Tokyo all the way to Seoul. We do a weekly radio test or whatever, just to make sure things are going well. If the government here, for whatever reason, decided they wanted to shut everything down and we needed to scream for help, let's say satellite communications were down, let's say everything was down, cell phone towers were all down, we could be able to send at least a short radio signal to let them know that something is going on here and we require assistance, and assistance would be coming forthcoming. So now more to the meat and potatoes of what I do. I am an information management specialist. We basically are the embassy's face to tackle everything that I've just mentioned, which includes telephone communications, server switches, routers, PCs, all that, and also radio. And we have other parts of it. If you think of the word communication within an embassy, it's split into two categories, two main buckets. One is classified communications, because obviously as a nation, we have secrets that we want to protect. And the other is just unclassified communications. So unclassified communications would be things like general email that you may send to a colleague somewhere else, or a friend, or an interlocutor at a country that you're trying to work with or liaise with. Unclassified communications obviously are things that are of a protected nature between the embassy and folks back in DC, policymakers back in DC. So while we don't create the data that is classified, we are tasked with the protection of said classified data. So we have to ensure the integrity of the data. We have to ensure that it's not messed with in transit from here to there. And we have to, we're not really the enforcement arm. The DS side deals with that more, but we have controls in place to ensure that when we communicate back and forth, when our colleagues communicate back and forth, that their communications are protected. We also have in our bucket of tasks, mail communications. So you think of regular mail that you just send to your mom, your dad, postcards and what have you. We refer to that as pouch. We are charged with the logistics of managing that program. And along with that, believe it or not, there's also classified pouch. Any kind of mail that needs to go back between, say, the chief of mission and or the front office, any of the executives, political officers, for whatever reason, say they've received some paper from one of their interlocutors that needs to be protected for whatever reason. We don't really, again, we don't assign the protected status to whatever paper is being protected. We're just charged with protecting it. We ensure that soup to nuts, from beginning to end, working in close proximity with DS, we ensure that all that mail is protected and only in the custody of cleared Americans and never tampered with or messed with otherwise. And I also mentioned, we also manage the telephone infrastructure, which includes, I'm a loss for words here. When you pick up the phone and dial the embassy, the operators, yeah. So we manage the operators also, and ensure that if, believe it or not, there's some times when there are threatening phone calls that come to the embassy, we have to be able to train our operators to, in concert, again, we work in close proximity with a lot of things we do with DS, because we're dealing with a lot of security issues and a lot of things that we are not empowered to, because we're not law enforcement officers. But we do have the access to raise the flag if there's something that requires their attention. And as soon as we raise that flag, there are processes in place that ensure that the missions and United States interests are protected.
And it's amazing. And so I'm an end user of True and his colleagues' materials. So public affairs sort of dreams up stuff sometimes. Hey, I'd like to take the ambassador up country and maybe we're going to have a film screening. And then I walk out of his office, right? So then it's up to True and his colleagues to figure out what the infrastructure is going to be like to make said thing happen. Do I go and talk to True before I talk to the ambassador? Probably not. I'm going to dream it up first and then drop it on his desk and skip off on my way. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we all sort of work and walk together. But I want to talk to you about facility management and construction engineering. And then I'd like for Janelle to talk about office management. So our construction engineers are responsible for monitoring and working with the contract overseas folks who are building new properties for us. We have new embassies and consulates going up all around the world. They're responsible for the renovation of existing properties. So in almost every country, we own the ambassador's residence. Frequently, we own some other residences and some other properties. So the renovation and maintenance of those overseas properties, someone has to make sure that all of that work is completed properly, on time, and for goodness sakes, within budget. So our construction engineers work everywhere doing incredible work. Some of their work has actually been profiled in things like Architectural Digest because some of the properties that we own around the world are heritage sites and others. Our facility managers are responsible, once we've built these beautiful embassies, they're responsible for the upkeep of the buildings, the grounds, all the fixtures and utilities overseas, while they supervise all this diverse workforce that we have that help to carry out our work. So when it comes to, I don't know, there may be a huge satellite that needs to go somewhere. So True and his team are going to talk about the logistics of what needs to happen. Facility management is going to also make sure that it remains secure, that's true, but also beautiful and fits in with the way that the architect has drawn it and the construction engineers have built it. So that's construction engineering and facility management. Now I'd like for Janelle to tell us about office management.
Okay, thank you, Yolanda. Office management specialist. I've joined the department in 2005, and I would say there's a great description on the website of some of the skills that you need, but the ones that I would emphasize are adaptability and flexibility. No two embassies or missions that I've served in have been the same, but some of the job requirements that are pretty common are managing the office, whether you're working in with diplomatic security agents in the regional security office, working in the economic section or political section with reporting officers, or supporting the deputy chief of mission and the ambassador in the executive office. There are going to be budgets, expenses to be tracked, vouchers to be submitted, time and attendance. You're also going to records management, keeping files. You are keeping files of the government's work overseas. Travel for within country and out for the officials that you're supporting, visitors from Washington who have questions before they arrive, have needs during their stay, and usually a few requests after they leave. You may, if you're supporting the chief of mission, be interviewing managers or butlers for the official residence of the ambassador. They're going to be, throughout the day, you're going to be supporting officials who are in meetings, and you're sort of the command central of your office. Your staff, your colleagues may be out across town. You're receiving calls or requests from Washington or from officials who need updates. You're attending country team meetings with senior officials and serving as the note taker for those meetings. The details of how it's done will change often. The programs or software that you're using will change every couple of years, it feels like. But as long as you're comfortable with change, that you know that you can adapt, that you will learn the new program, the new procedures. I think you can have a great career learning and growing, and it's been the case for me.
I will note that Janelle and I worked together in Jamaica. She was the office manager for the deputy chief of mission. That's the ambassador's lieutenant or deputy. And that person was my direct boss. So I remember, I don't know if Janelle has blocked there or whatever, but I was in a meeting with the deputy chief of mission and one of the ministers, a minister of culture, and we've had a lovely chat. And during that lovely chat, it was, oh, why don't we have dinner? So why doesn't the deputy chief of mission host you for dinner tonight, like in a few hours? So, I sort of skipped out. Everything's great for me. And oh, by the way, Janelle, he just agreed to dinner for the minister. So what happens then is who liaises with the house staff, right? Who liaises, oh, is there chicken thawing or something? It just happened that the public affairs officer dreamed up something and someone has to make it happen. So I remember clearly skipping off and going about my business. I remember that we showed up for dinner and everything was great. What happened between me skipping off and going about my business and dinner being served on time, a lot of those details actually are with the office manager. So I appreciate her for still speaking to me for things like that. What I'd like to do before we go on to diplomatic security, because we always get lots and lots of questions, is to tell you about English language programs and our health professions. So our international information in English language programs is something that people really don't think about when you think about the Foreign Service initially. But the United States government, through U.S. embassies and consulates, is one of the largest teachers of U.S. English, of English, North American English, around the world. So we have two career tracks. The first are our regional English language officers. They work with our embassies and consulates to develop long-term English language program strategic plans. So they work with our partners and language professionals in country. They provide this network for those who are going to be teaching English, teachers of English throughout the world. And they are really working largely hand in hand with public affairs officers like myself. Then our regional public engagement specialists, they counsel public affairs officers and mission officials on how effective our information programs and resources and services are. Throughout the world, we maintain things called American spaces. And this is back to True and his colleagues. We allow folks, and also for diplomatic security, we allow people to come into our facilities and have their own phones, their own devices, and they get on our networks. So some people do weird things like download torrents and et cetera, et cetera. I skip off and go about my business because then I'm going to talk largely with Drew and his colleagues about making sure that our networks remain secure and that we're able to provide that kind of support for people who visit those facilities. So then let me quickly tell you about our medical and health professions, because I know there are lots and lots of questions for diplomatic security. So every embassy and consulate around the world maintains a health unit that could be turned into a surgical suite if necessary. We have several positions under these umbrellas. We have medical providers. These are frequently nurse practitioners or physician's assistants. They are providing acute and emergency care to US government employees and our family members at our missions. They are incredible resources. I think my son has had most of his inoculations throughout his life in an embassy health unit. So they provide, think of family physicians and nurse practitioners, family practices, because they're dealing with everyone from the Foreign Service employees down to very small children. And also frequently, some people will have members of household like I did, or my mother who is elderly. And in her instance, she was also using the health unit. We have regional medical laboratory scientists. They're responsible for, they manage the laboratories assigned at our various embassies and consulates. They provide technical consulting and they perform competency assessments. They evaluate the quality assurance for all of these samples and whatnot that are being shipped frequently back to the United States for testing and onward analysis. Our regional medical officers are board certified physicians. They provide primary medical and acute care. They are sort of the backup, if you will, to our nurse practitioners and our PAs at post. So they are, there will be a regional medical officer at an embassy that has responsibility for a particular region. It is they who are counseling and working closely with our physician's assistants, and others at post. We also have regional psychiatrists. We've seen some stuff, as you might imagine, and we take our mental wellness seriously. So our regional psychiatrists are board certified. They provide support to foreign service employees and their families. So they too have regional responsibilities. So they may be resident at one embassy and then provide services at several other embassies or missions in a region. So with that, I would like for Cliff to tell us everything that folks want to know about diplomatic security.
Sounds great. So diplomatic security, when you think about the federal law enforcement and security arm of the State Department, I'm going to talk about the overseas component first, because that's kind of where we started. And then I'll move into kind of what DS agents do domestically as well. So overseas, we have 4 different career tracks. You've got special agents, security engineering officers, security technical specialists, and couriers. I'll talk about the others first, and I'll leave the special agents for last. So your security engineering officers and your security technical specialists, they are largely responsible for the physical and technical security of an embassy. So if you think about an embassy and you think about what that, you've got Delta barriers, you've got cameras, you've got itemizers, walk-through metal detectors, you've got alarm systems, et cetera. So the maintenance of those and the installation of those are generally going to be the responsibility of those engineers and technical specialists. Your engineers are generally going to provide oversight for the technical security specialists. The engineers are going to come from an engineering background. They are going to be the ones that are going to look at the larger picture of whatever type of project we might have going on. Maybe we are doing a compound security upgrade to provide handicap access to the consular entrance. And the SEOs are going to look back and say, okay, we want to provide a handicap ramp. Now, what is that going to look like in the adjustments of security as it relates to meeting our security requirements? So you've got those 2 positions that largely work together. Then you've got your diplomatic couriers. They are responsible, as True spoke about, getting classified information around the world. They're usually assigned to large hubs like Bangkok and Frankfurt, but they spend a lot of time in the air because they are flying those. We say they're always orange. They're not always orange bags, but they're responsible for flying those orange bags around the world that have our classified information and equipment inside of them. So the special agents. So everything that DS does is boils down to the protection of diplomatic personnel, diplomatic facilities, and classified information. Overseas, special agents serve as a security advisor to the ambassador. The ambassador has that overall responsibility. However, it's delegated down to RSOs. Now that looks different depending on the embassy that you're in. In some places, you are managing security programs. You may be managing a local guard force. You may be managing a residential security program. You may be managing a physical security working with those SEOs and STSs. In that type of environment, let's say a place like Pretoria, South Africa, you are largely, business casual or business attire, and you are managing security projects. Now, however, there are also opportunities for more robust opportunities for RSOs in places like Syria, places like Pakistan, places like Iraq, where you're still doing the same basic thing, but it is at a higher degree. So when I was in Syria, I was still responsible for protecting diplomats, but rather than simply managing a security portfolio, I was physically providing security for those diplomatic personnel going into different places throughout northern Syria, Raqqa, and places like that. So that is largely what we do. Marine Security Guard program. Generally speaking, everybody's heard of the Marines that work at Post 1. The RSO oversees and manages that security program. So largely we're security managers, and people who come into this agency, they can kind of tailor their career to where they want to, where their interests are and where they want to go. Now, there are going to be, fair share requirements. So everybody's going to be required to take their fair share. But if you like the overseas component, or if you like the protection component or the investigations component, which I'll speak to later on, you can kind of tailor your career to spend more time in those type of programs. So domestically, we are federal law enforcement agents, just like the FBI, Secret Service, DEA. However, what makes us unique is that we're also foreign service officers. We're responsible for investigating visa and passport fraud because those are the documents that are issued by the State Department. If you want to travel overseas, you've got to have a passport that comes from a passport agency, which is the State Department. If a foreign national wants to come to Disneyland, they're largely 9 times out of 10, they're going to have a visa that's issued from a consular officer. So any fraud or malfeasance that's related to those 2 documents, we investigate. And people commit fraud for different reasons. It could be for purely immigration purposes. It could be a Mexican national who obtains the identity of a Puerto Rican US citizen just because they want to stay in America, and that passport is going to give them unquestioned ability to do so. It could be an American citizen who has committed a crime and they want to hide their true identity. Of course, there's always terrorism, issues. There's also trafficking, both in narcotics and human trafficking. If I am a drug trafficker and
Fix it, True, fix it.
Okay, looks like Diplomat Jeffrey is frozen for the moment. Diplomat,
sorry,
we'll give you about
are
10
you
seconds to unfreeze. All right, perfect. We got you
all
back.
right, I'm back. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
No
So
worries.
visa fraud, people generally commit visa fraud for financial means, whether it be labor trafficking or human trafficking, but they're bringing people into the United States under fraudulent circumstances to do things that are going to reap a financial reward. So in addition to protection, we also do, in addition to investigations, we also do protection. We protect the US Secretary of State, we protect the US Ambassador to the United Nations, and we protect foreign dignitaries that come into the United States. So at any point on a domestic assignment, you could be asked to travel with the Secretary of State on an overseas trip. Before coming here for language, I recently traveled with the Secretary to Iceland for the Arctic Council. And then 2 weeks later, I turned around and traveled with the US Ambassador to the United Nations to Turkey and to the Turkish-Syrian border, where she was negotiating access of humanitarian aid to Syrian refugees. So the opportunity to travel is immense. And in addition to that, there are also liaison jobs within DS, which are really unique. Once again, we're responsible for protecting facilities, diplomats, and classified information. So we have embeds at places like the Joint Terrorism Task Force. We have embeds at the National Security Council. We have embeds at all of the DoD COCOMs like Southcom, PACOM, JSOC, CENTCOM, et cetera, because those are the individuals that, should things start to tither bad at an embassy overseas, those are the assets and those are the resources that we would need to work with to make resolutions. So that's largely, that's DS in a nutshell. I know that there are probably going to be some questions. As far as the basic minimum requirements, you have to be between the age of 21 and 36 because it is federal law enforcement. You have to have a BA at the time of application. That's important because it used to be that you could apply up to 6 months before you got your actual degree. But now when that announcement comes out, you have to have that degree in hand. You have to be available for worldwide assignment, and you have to pass the physical readiness test, which is a run, push-ups in 2 minutes and sit-ups in 2 minutes. I can tell you, I was in the Marine Corps, I was in the Army. It's not Marine Corps standards. It's not easy, but it's definitely, it's achievable. And I know that you guys started talking this series about the biggest, myth busters. I want to say that the biggest myth buster for DS is really that you don't have to come from a military or law enforcement background to be an agent. We specifically, we look for a diverse core of representatives as agents. I can teach somebody how to shoot. I can teach somebody how to drive. I can teach somebody all of the hard skills. But oftentimes, what you can't teach are interpersonal skills, cultural adaptiveness, and those type of things that make someone a good diplomat. So that's, I think that's probably one of the most unique parts of DS. And I'll leave it there and take any questions.
Maritza, before we go into all that, I just am so pleased. I've put a link in the chat. You should know that for real, Clifton Jeffrey is a for real hero. His actions in Peshawar led him to be decorated as not just the Diplomatic Security Agent of the Year that year, but he's decorated as a hero. So what I want folks to take away, not just from this session, but also just from this series, who, by the way, who put this series together? It's our very own Maritza. So let's shout her out. What I want folks to know is that people who look like you are doing some really interesting things in the federal government, in the State Department. It's easy, I think, for us to focus on foreign service officers, right? It's what we do. We talk and it's policy, but this is only a portion. It's a slice of what diplomats do. So our foreign service specialists are diplomats. We like to say they're diplomats with special skills. So they come with very, very clear requirements. Unlike joining the Foreign Service as a Foreign Service generalist or an officer, there is not a degree requirement to become a Foreign Service officer. Not so for specialists. There are very clear requirements. Our positions are for real positions, right? They went to med school. And so as you heard, Cliff is a lawyer. So all the requirements are there. You can't just like, oh, I think I kind of want to be in IT, which you can do, frankly, if you want to be a Foreign Service officer. I kind of want to be a Foreign Service officer. I don't really have a particular background and whatever, but you do have to go through our entry processes. And I've put a link to what those are. So folks always have tons of questions about DS, lots and lots of questions about IT. I just want you to know that there are dozens of ways to serve your country in the State Department, that folks who look like you are doing it, and that we're not tucked away, and we're here to answer your questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. As you can see why she is one of my favorite distinguished diplomats. She's so amazing in terms of not just personally amazing, but her wealth of knowledge. And like she mentioned, it's an honor to have people that look like us in these high positions of powers. And we don't always have the opportunity to know who they are and even understand that the roles even exist. And so thank you, diplomats Kearney and Diplomat Walker and Natoma and Jeffrey, for joining us for today's event. So speaking of not knowing that these roles exist, Diplomat Walker, Natoma, and Jeffrey, how did you learn about your positions? Can you share, and we'll start with you, Diplomat Walker, can you share about your journey to becoming a foreign service specialist?
Sure. I knew about the Foreign Service and was a little intimidated by the exam. I didn't see myself wanting to become the public affairs officer like Yolanda, but I was really intrigued by the idea of working in the embassies. And years later, I was living and working in New York, and I wanted more. And I'd had a great experience working in New York, and I knew I wanted to be an organization or an organization with a mission that I could commit to, that I could feel proud of. And lo and behold, they were advertising on monster.com for office management specialists. And it's a long process but I put the application in, and it's the kind of thing that when you tell your employer and your colleagues that you're leaving, that they are excited and happy for you and can't wait to hear more about what it's like. So it was they sent me off with good wishes, and it's been a great experience. No regrets.
Thanks for sharing that. We've actually had questions in the past about navigating USA.gov. So it's good to hear that we can find some of these amazing positions on Indeed. So thanks for providing that perspective and insight. Diplomat Natoma, how did you learn about your experience? And I know you're like the IT guru. When I was going over your bio, I was like, I have no idea what all these certifications mean. So as an IT person, like, how did you find out about this particular role?
Well, so my journey begins from childhood. I'm a first generation American. I was born in New York. My father and mother are Nigerian citizens. After birth, my father he came to school in New York and went to Hunter's College, New York, graduated with a degree in political science. Then he went back to Nigeria and joined the Foreign Service. So I grew up in the Foreign Service, but only from a Nigerian perspective. So I was aware of the Foreign Service existing as a thing in the ether. I wasn't at that time. Obviously, I hadn't chosen a career track. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was a kid. So I grew up and I joined the United States military specifically. And my first job in the Army was telecommunications, after which I halfway through, I ported over to IT management, which I currently do. I separated from military. I enjoyed the whole thing of travel because I had not known, well, to date, I don't know any other way to be. I can't be in one place for more than 3 years at a time. I feel uncomfortable. I feel stagnated. So I have to move. So I went to go work for the Department of the Army. But the Department of the Army, working overseas, has almost what's the counter to what the Department of State has. The Department of the Army wants you more domestic than they do overseas as a civilian. They cap your stay overseas at 5 years, after which you're supposed to return back to the United States for 2 years, 2 calendar years, and then reapply to go back overseas. Well, that didn't fit my my chosen way of living. So I looked into the Department of State. At the time, it was logical that DOS had to have some form of IT that corresponded with what the world was at that time in 2011 when I applied. So when I applied, I saw the criteria. Fortunately for me, I met them through the job I was doing with DoD and also my time in the Army. I applied for it, and as Janelle said, it's a pretty lengthy process and it can appear a little daunting to start with, but if you stick with it and you know this is what you want to do, it ends up paying dividends. I actually did not get a call to start the job until I'd already forgotten about my application. I was doing something else in life and I received an email saying, you've been selected to come to such and such specialist class. I was wholly excited. I mean, I was over the moon. And as Janelle also said, it's the kind of notification that when you receive and you share with family and friends, people are just so excited and ecstatic for you, because it's one of those things that to those who know about and those who are in the know, if you will, it is somewhat prestigious. And I'm hesitant to use that term because we kind of take it for granted. But when I go back to the US and I talk to my friends and classmates, the experiences and things that I've seen over the past, since 2012, 9 years, I've lived an experience. Every single country I've lived in has been a life experience in and of itself. So from that, I'm here. Once I joined, I knew I was never leaving. I am going to keep working until they kick me out, which is at age 65. I love what I do.
Thank you so much for sharing, Diplomat Natoma. And I heard perseverance and resilience in your journey, which a lot of our attendees throughout this session has shared that maybe perhaps they've taken the FSOT a couple of times, or they're eager to know what's the timeline for the process. So I love that you share that perspective, so that for those that are interested in representing our country in this prestigious role, and it is prestigious, so you can use that term. You guys don't get enough honor that is due as diplomats. But thank you for sharing that perspective. Diplomat Jeffrey, your service, oh my goodness, thank you, Diplomat Kearney, for sharing that bio. It's extremely amazing. Thank you for the honor of joining our session for today. Please share with us, your journey to this role. How can we learn about Foreign Service Specialists? How did you find out about Foreign Service Specialists?
And the reason I'm so passionate about recruitment and telling and getting the word out about the State Department is because coming from Mississippi 15 years ago, that was fairly non-existent. I literally learned about the State Department through chance and happening circumstance. I was in law school at the time. I was in my second year. I joined the Marine Corps and had been a reservist. However, someone else that I had joined the Marine Corps with at the same time had gone active duty, and they had become a Marine security guard. And they just so happened to come back home to Mississippi during their vacation. And we were sitting around talking, and I was saying, hey, I don't know if I want to practice law. I don't know if I want to deal with billable hours. I'm thinking about going to the JAG Corps, and they said, hey, why don't you consider this job, as a regional security officer? It's kind of, you still get to work with the military, you still get to serve your country, but albeit you're doing it in a different way as a diplomat. And I said, oh, wow, that sounds great. And so I applied when they had the next announcement, and I didn't hear anything back for quite a while. So I graduated law school, I took the bar, I started practicing, and literally about 3 or 4 months after I had passed the bar, I received a telephone call saying, hey, do you still want to interview for this job with the State Department? And they said, it's in Dallas, and Dallas was 6 hours away. And I said, hey, let me, my current employer had just paid all of my, my bar fees, my licensure, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a difficult decision to make, but, I called back and I said, yeah, I'll go ahead and interview. And, the way I looked at it is that if I had turned it down, I always would have wondered, like, what would it have been like to join the Foreign Service? Because I said, at the end of the day, if I didn't like it, I could always go back, to Mississippi and practice law. That's easy. But, I said, the practice of law would always be there. So I applied, and about 5 or 6 months later, I received a phone call saying, hey, we want you to start, in the next special agent class. And, it's been down, downhill since then. I can tell you that sometimes I'm the envy of my law school classmates. They make very good money, some of them in private practice, but, the ability to see the world, the ability to travel, the ability to, go and do and see places that many Americans won't do in a lifetime. I mean, it pays dividends. So I have not looked back. I have used I have been able to use my law degree throughout DS as a criminal investigator. I've worked with U.S. attorneys in New Orleans. I actually worked with attorneys who went to the same law school that I went to. So I was able to use that law degree both in an abstract, but also in a more direct means. So that's my journey to Foreign Service.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. In your journey, I heard the power of networking and making sure that we maintain healthy relationships with our peers. Some of our members, they're typically very eager to seek mentors. And, I constantly remind them that, some great mentors could be our peers. Don't, write them off. A lot of times your peers will have the pulse on what's recent, what's current, and you never know where your peers are going to go, after college. And so, I always share whenever I'm hosting different mentorship panels, I'll tell them one thing that I wish that I would have done better when I was back in school was, instead of being this, I would still be a leader like I was, but I would have been much more intentional about staying in contact with my peers. So thank you for sharing that insight. And Diplomat Kearney did a great job of giving you guys an opportunity to share more about what your roles are, the black letter law. And I'm using my legalese terms since Diplomat Natoma has totally taken my mind over all these technical terms in IT. You guys have talked about, what it looks like as written. Can you guys share your experience in practice? What does a day in a life look like? And we can start with you, Matt Jeffrey. Like, what does your day look like? If you can walk us through what that day is.
As a first tour agent, which you would be coming into this job, we go to a domestic field office first. And so the beauty of this job is every day can be totally different. I've had instances where I've woken up, gone to the office, and my boss has said, hey, I need you to go to I need you to go to Jerusalem, and you're leaving in 2 days. So go ahead, go down, try to get a visa so that you can head out to Jerusalem. Or I've come into the office and they say, hey, we're going to do a criminal investigation out in El Paso. Go home, pack your trunk, because you're going to drive out to El Paso this afternoon. So, and I think another exciting thing is that world events can impact your day to day on such a drastic extent. There have been times where I've seen things transpiring in the news and I'm like, well, I know I'll be getting a call pretty soon here. The emails will be coming. And that could be anything from, you know, our recent evacuation from Afghanistan, or the president who was killed in Haiti, and his wife ended up coming to the United States. Somebody has to protect her, and she came into Miami. So I knew that there's going to be a big possibility that we would be doing that. So just how world events can dictate your day-to-day has been really, really amazing. On the overseas front, once again, it could be a day where you're just working a 9 to 5 managing security, but you know, things always pop up. You know, it could be, I've had instances where people have thrown book bags over the embassy walls because they had stole something, and they're running past the embassy and they throw this bag over the wall. And of course, all of a sudden the Marines are reacting, and I'm getting a call on Saturday to say, sir, a bag just came over the embassy wall. What do we do? You know? And so I think that's been the beauty of the job, is you just never know what tomorrow might bring. You look at your BlackBerry or your iPhone, and it could change in a minute.
But Matt, Jeffrey, do you guys still use BlackBerries?
Well, I dated myself with BlackBerry.
I know, it's like BlackBerry.
Wait, I just came out of a mission though that just got rid of BlackBerry, so I'm just saying.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that was, thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. I think Diplomat Kearney kind of alluded to it in the chat box. A fun fact, you know, the common knowledge that we would assume that the Secret Service is the one that provides protection to our corps and our statesmen, but it's actually diplomat security. So that's really cool to learn as well too. And thank you for sharing the insights about how, you know, current events can impact your day-to-day. I know for myself, I work in the consulting aspect of diplomacy and national security, and I tell our clients all the time, you know, what's going to happen, what determines whether or not we can get a bill passed in Congress or we can get this ambassador to come speak at your event has totally to do with what's going to be placed on CNN and Fox News for the day. So that's a huge piece of our industry in that sec. Diplomat-In-Residence, you know, I'm really interested in the CISSP. I'm probably messing up all the different acronyms of your specialty. I would love to know more about what your work entails. I know you gave us a little bit in your description about maybe there might be some intersection with cybersecurity and the importance of networks and our department wanting to protect its assets. So please walk us through a day in the life.
So yeah, there is definitely a huge intersection with cybersecurity. But again, anything that we do that deals with security is done in concert with diplomatic security. So Diplomat Clifton could speak to that also. But from a technical perspective, as far as the protection of the technical infrastructure, we do play a role. And CISSP is one of the premier security certifications available out there. So there is no typical day in the life of an IMS. We had past assignment, we had someone who on the anniversary of the American holiday, July 4th, in Paris, this individual for the past couple of years has always mailed a parcel of marijuana to the embassy. Now, given the fact that it's a foreign country, the laws and rules apply differently over there. Obviously, the mail staff have tried everything they could to identify who this person is and say, stop doing this, whatever. We don't know what this person's inclinations or compunctions were, but we followed routine procedure. Called the DS, called the RSO. Well, he's done it again. You know, the investigation starts, they call the local police, and you know, nothing ever comes from that. But it's, in that respect, that was more benign than anything else. But I just mentioned that from a perspective of being in charge of the mailroom, you have to be cognizant of how you handle relationships within the embassy to deal with varying things that happen. I just use that as an outlier example of things that have happened that I can speak to. Or you can talk about the time when I was in Sri Lanka, when there's a monkey that comes into the embassy and is chewing all the technical infrastructure, the wiring and the cable. And because of that, there tends to be a loss of communications or latency. And we have to go through and rewire everything. We had to call the local veterinary assistant to come through and dart the monkey. And it actually made USA Today back in the US. They had a picture of the capuchin monkey and everything. So in this role, yes, traditionally, you would require a very, very good understanding of networking as relates to servers, routers, switches, applications, operating systems, computing, telephone communications. That base knowledge serves more to speak to your aptitude. So while the Department of State is not necessarily looking at you to be a functional specialist, to say you're writing code or designing one application, you're more looked upon to maintain that. They have the technical specialist contractors back in DC who work out of Bay State that manage those applications at a more nitty-gritty level. Now, that's not to say that you cannot still, while being overseas, challenge yourself and seek out other ways and other avenues with which to grow your IT experience. And I've tried to, and I pride myself in that wherever I go, any country I serve in, I always try to add an additional IT certification. I do that for two reasons. One, I don't want to stagnate, and two, the Department of State offers a 15% skill incentive pay to maintain current certifications in that realm. So that's the reason why, one of the reasons why I have all of those alphabet soup all in my name, and I'm very interested in that. But truthfully speaking, the life of an IMS, I think if there's anything that anyone has used that goes through all the panelists has been interpersonal skills. The way you deal with the daily ebb and flow and the mixes and matches and the challenges that you encounter, knowing who to talk to within the embassy to get stuff done. I'll give you, for instance, the OMS cone. Yo, those are our best assets. If you're trying to get someone to nuance or balance out a piece of information that you want to get to either the front office or to the RSO or to the political office, you would be doing yourself a disservice if you tried to sidestep the OMS, because they are like the gatekeepers, and it's a well-known secret. If you want to be successful as an IMS, you make the OMS your best friend. They will take care of you more times than you care to mention. But yeah, look, it's lovely. I love it. Anything you want to know?
Actually, your role sounds pretty cool to me. I love your day in the life, and some of the cases that you come across are very, very interesting. I also wouldn't have thought that it would be someone in IT that would be, I guess, the front line on some of these areas and issues. So it's good for some of our attendees who are interested in, diversifying, their degrees and experience, to see that there's actually pretty unique ways to have fun with your degree. Speaking of having fun with your degree and having diverse experiences and being able to transfer particularly Arab expertise into the Foreign Service, Diplomat Walker, I'm especially intrigued in your area because if Diplomat Kearney is successful in recruiting me into the Corps, I'd probably be interested in the management, cone or mix of public diplomacy. And so I love how you transferred your HR experience into your existing role. So can you walk us through what does a day in a life look like for you?
The day in the life of an OMS in the embassy, a good example that comes to mind is this was an old one, but from my BlackBerry days, which is not that far back. We did have to hang on to them for a while. Checking email before that first sip of coffee and knowing that the Deputy Chief of Mission is hosting and the Office of Defense Cooperation are hosting the host country nationals, government officials, because we are trying to sell them American-made helicopters, right? And that morning or overnight, guidance has come out from Washington about military equipment sales, right? You needing to know what your mission's priorities are, what your boss's priorities are, what's on your boss's schedule for the day, so that if she's getting ready to host these folks at her residence, but she also has kids to get off to school, she may not see that message first thing in the morning. And this is something that you're going to bring to her attention to make sure she's fully briefed on the latest guidance from Washington about this. If you're in the office during the day and you have a good working relationship with the RSO office, and for for some reason, something's falling through the cracks, and this is a real example. Security at the main entrance is telling you that the German ambassador is arriving. He believes he has a meeting. There's been a disconnect somewhere. This wasn't my ball drop, by the way. But and our ambassador is in a meeting. And now I'm trying to get a hold of the person who's managing his schedule to find out, is the German ambassador in the wrong place, or is our ambassador in a meeting that we need to wrap up right away? And just trying to get those two in the same room without anybody noticing that there's been some mix up on the calendar, that everyone feels like they've been greeted graciously and shown the way in. But you better have a really good relationship with everybody from the front door to the ambassador's office in order to get that person in seamlessly. That if you're at your desk and a threatening call comes in, that you know who to call. Do you know who's in the building at that moment? That who can you always reach, and how can you get in touch with them? I would always think with senior officials and senior staff, they're, not to throw anybody under the bus, but sometimes they need to be reminded about what the limitations are of things they can do on their computers, with their phones, what have you. And so who do you snitch to? You call True and you tell him what your boss is trying to get up to. And the two of you diplomatically walk that back and say, actually, here's something we could do instead. We could arrange the photo shoot somewhere else. We could invite these guests that you wanted to take around to do something else, maybe off campus. But there's a lot of that, getting to know who your colleagues, what they are covering, how to get in touch with them, how to raise something urgent, knowing what your boss's priorities are, knowing what your mission's goals are, so that as messages are coming in, it's not usually, and I think this is true for everyone, you're not usually sitting there daydreaming when the crisis comes up or when something raises a red flag. You are in the middle of something else. You have, somebody's calling, somebody's at the door, and also something strange is going on, and you need to be able to quickly address that, or know which things can wait and which things cannot. And that just, you get better at it with time, but the emergencies and the crises never actually stop. You just get better at it.
This is a great segue to make the official statement that the views of our panelists are their personal views and does not represent the views of the State Department and United States government, since Diplomat Walker is snitching on folks here. So we want to make it very clear. Diplomat Walker, there's so much more to learn from you. So I'm going to actually ask you another question. Share with us a little bit more about your 6 diplomatic missions and 4 geographic bureaus. Were those all in the same role? If not, tell us what roles you were in those respective missions. And if they were, how did your day in life differ depending on where you were located geographically, and in which mission that you were serving?
Daily life differed quite a lot. My very first assignment was in West Africa, in Bamako, Mali, and I was working for the Deputy Chief of Mission, and I was the only direct hire office management specialist in that embassy. So it's really, you talked about networking earlier. When I joined, I was one of 11 in my orientation class. And the importance of keeping in touch with those folks, because we're going to 11 different countries, but their office may have more resources. They may be working with 4 or 5 other experienced OMSs. So I may be solo, but only if I don't have anyone to reach out to. So even if you join and you don't know another person in the Foreign Service, which that was the case for me. There are some people who were raised as Foreign Service kids. So networking starts day one, and it's a priority because you could be moving to a tiny fishbowl, and you need a mentor or a sounding board for something. And it's great to have that network, to start building that network as soon as you join. I'm sorry, did I answer your question?
I'm
May
gonna
I
use my,
interject?
my
May I-
legal, privilege here and ask you another follow-up question since you did not answer my
Sure.
question.
Okay,
Learn
yes,
about
please
your
do.
tours. Tell us about your other missions.
Oh, my other missions. So then from there, it's been a long time, right? After Bamako, I went to Brussels. I worked in the U.S. mission to NATO. So it's not a traditional bilateral mission. That city actually has 3 different missions. So it was a unique experience because you have American colleagues, but just down the hall you have colleagues from all of the partner nations. And you are interacting with them on a regular basis. After that, I went to Beirut, Kingston, Jamaica, London, Prague, and then 2 years on a roving assignment, doing short-term assignments in Latin America, the Caribbean, and Canada. So adaptability and flexibility.
Thanks for sharing. And in all those different diplomatic missions, did you still have the same role or did you have different roles? Does your experience differ depending on where you were working?
Yeah, I worked in different offices in different missions. The various countries some have a staff of 1,000 people, and some have a staff of just a couple of dozen people. So the size varies quite a bit. The roles vary within the mission. I've worked in the regional security office for one tour, and then a couple of short-term assignments in other regional security offices. I've worked for political sections and economic sections. The different offices sort of have their own culture, sometimes their own personality, and their benefits and pros and cons, like everything else. So I would say sometimes the variety is good. Knowing that you're moving on, you learn a lot. You learn a lot about it, and maybe that becomes your favorite area to work in. There are many OMSs who, for instance, love working in security. And they feel a great kinship with diplomatic security agents, and they like being in the center of the stuff that I would find stressful to think about on a daily basis. I don't want to know that much about what's going on. I trust the diplomatic security to keep us safe, but I don't want to think about it every day. I like working in the front office because you get to interact with all of the sections, including the non-State Department agencies quite a bit that you, but some people dislike the fact that it's a little bit like Grand Central. You instead of having a quiet place to write or read or keep track of things, you need to be able to do it with a revolving door of people passing through, talking to you, calling you, talking to your boss. So yeah, the embassies vary, the offices within the embassy vary, and yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Diplomat Walker. And before I move into a question about cultural competency, as I see that Diplomat Natoma has worked in various countries, Diplomat Kearney, did you want to use your privilege as distinguished diplomat? I think you had a question or maybe want to provide an insight. I'll turn it over to you if you want to add anything or throw in a question.
I have a question very briefly, because this is the way of it with our Foreign Service specialist professionals. Just as a culture, it's a get it done. There's no need for any fanfare kind of thing. I would say, I'm going to generalize, that is probably not the case with a lot of Foreign Service journalists, whereas we're happy to tell you about all the stuff that we did. So one of the things that's important to note that Diplomat Walker has not spoken about clearly is that she worked as a rover. So imagine, if you will, you have someone who normally works in X office at X embassy. And at some point that person is going to go on vacation, or perhaps they fall ill, or et cetera. You can't just leave that empty. So someone has to be able to come into an entirely new mission. They know no one there. They're going to come in, they're going to fall into the seat without losing a step and be able to keep that office running. And so, as you might imagine, there are only a handful of our office managers that are trusted to take those positions. And I need you to know that Diplomat Walker was one for the Western Hemisphere, which means that she would be able to use her Spanish and just sort of plop in and be, it's like walking into a movie 10 minutes late, right? What is that? What's going on? And yet everything still moves on. So I was a little annoyed that she refused to share that, but I wanted to provide some context for what that job is like.
Thank you, Diplomat Kearney, and I'll use my legal privilege. I'll turn it over to you, Diplomat Walker. Do you have any response? Is there anything else would you like to share with us about your amazing accolades? Since Diplomat Kearney just snitched on you.
I want legal privilege, and, and also no, the rover assignment was one of my favorites. I did enjoy it, and it is strange. There was probably I did some of this travel was during the pandemic, so I spent a lot of time locked up in quarantine. But I also and got to use my Spanish quite a lot. But before the pandemic, even without that, there was. I passed through my home office, was in Fort Lauderdale, which is where I consider home. And I asked I was in the office, I said, I'm just checking, is there any change of plans on my trip to Santiago? Because because I've seen the riots on the news. And the director said, what riots? Man. So I got on the plane, I went, I was told that no, everyone takes a taxi. We don't pick anyone up at the airport. Okay, all right, great. Take a taxi, figure it out, get to the hotel. They're expecting, foreign dignitaries for a meeting that was ultimately canceled because the riots did not abate. And that trip was a weird mix of trying to help them get ready for the possible arrival of our head of state, and also be keeping an eye on the announcements and heading back to the hotel early if the protests were headed towards the embassy. They were not directed at us, but they were pretty boisterous. Getting a nose full of tear gas on the way back to the hotel was not fun. But there's something about, I think is true of a lot of foreign service specialists, that we like being busy. We like being busy, we like working on important stuff. But when Yolanda jokes about skipping away, she doesn't really skip away. She has 101 things on her plate every day. And the reason that everyone is happy to support them is because she's making the mission look good. She's making the country look good, and they're happy to be a part of it. So the dropping into the embassies for short-term stays is it's a little, you do definitely forget where you are when you wake up, but it's also fun to drop in. We're always endlessly curious, right? So the chance to see so many places over a 2-year period was a great experience.
Thank you for sharing. And so I want to move to the topic of cultural competency. It's one that's near and dear to me. I have opportunities to do a lot of programs with attorneys, specifically helping them prep when they're doing their overseas legal missions on human rights cases, and with our firm with embassies and corporations that are just interested in cultural diplomacy writ large. And I've seen like this recurring theme where as Americans, we're not as open as we should be when it comes to being receiving other cultures. And when we do travel overseas, making sure that we're open to receiving that culture and fully immersing. I know, Diplomat Notomo, you've worked in Romania, South Korea, Italy, Germany, Sri Lanka, Croatia, France, Japan, and Diplomat Jeffrey, you've also worked in Pakistan, Botswana, Iraq, Eritrea, and Syria. Can you talk a little bit, and we'll start with you, Diplomat Notomo, talk about the importance of cultural competency, and how has that been helpful for you, being able to be open to working in diverse locations, geographic, perhaps, include how you've been able to utilize yourself as a person of color. How's that maybe been helpful to you in your role as well? And so I'll turn it over to you first, Diplomat Notomo, and then Diplomat Jeffrey, you can follow with the same question.
All right. So my experience is a little mixed. Half of the countries I traveled to, I traveled when I worked for the Department of the Army. I was working overseas for them, but I did have local nationals who worked with me and for me. Department of State, it's the same, but I'll speak more to the Department of State. Just know that it was fed from my experience while working in Department of the Army. But when I started with state, my first assignment was Sri Lanka. I very quickly realized that the Sri Lankan people are very, very culturally different than Americans are. For instance, one thing that I noticed off top is as a manager, when I come in and I task my personnel who are equally sound technically, and I task them to do something that I want done technically, they just proceed and go ahead and do it. I'm not, I mean, I'm not really used to that. I'm used to a little bit of give and take where I am not the arbiter of what is perfect. So if I tell you to do something, I expect and hope that you at least give a little bit of a pushback and say, okay, what are your thought processes? What's the methodology? You know, some probative questions that get at the heart of whatever goes on. So once I realized that, I had a conversation with my boss at the time, who had previously been in the country for a year, but had been in the Department of State for 10 years prior to my first assignment. And he suggested something, a practice which I have followed on with and continue doing at every country I go to. Whenever I first arrive, I have, once I've met my staff, I like to have like an informal sit down where I have an open forum where we just talk and just get to know each other. I let them know what kind of person I am, try to suss out what kind of people they are beyond what you read on Wikipedia or what you read about the country or what the expectations are culturally. It's also important to have that people-to-people connection. I try to let them know that, and part of the discussion also is that I want them to know that, yes, traditionally, you're not used to seeing a person of color in this role. And I say this not just as a thing. When I served in Paris in a mission that was north of 500 people, I was the only direct hire from the Department of State that was a person of color. Everyone else was Caucasian. There were some females and there were some males, but I was the only person of color for 2 years out of a 3-year assignment. The third year, a female came and joined us. So oftentimes, while Paris is not a good example to use because they're more westernized in a sense, but oftentimes a lot of these countries like Sri Lanka, for instance, or a lot of third world countries, when you go overseas as a person of color and you tell them that you work at the US Embassy, you're looked at with a little bit of skepticism, like, how is this possible? How could you work for the American Embassy? And that actually has led me to my current mission, which is to increase diversity within the Department of State. But I digress. So as I said, any embassy I go to, I try to sit down with folks. I try to get to know them. I try to make the person-to-person connection. And I try to weave that in my management style and also in the way I talk to other locally engaged staff who may be in other sections, maybe not necessarily under me, but maybe I go to the HR section, I need something from them, or I go to the health unit, or I go to general services section. I try to weave in whatever I've learned in how to talk to these different cultures and adapt it to my understanding of what being a diplomat is, because ultimately interpersonal skills is what defines you as a diplomat, successful in what you do. And it's also important to know that there are certain places, without mentioning any names, that what is acceptable culturally in that society is totally against what we accept in the US. So now within the confines of the US Embassy, there has to be a shared expectation of certain standards beneath which we will not go. So there are things that you will acquiesce and you will do just because you're in a foreign country or there's something that's done culturally. But bullying, for instance, there's some countries that these things do happen. When you see one LES bullying another LES, look, it's incumbent upon you as a direct hire to step in and say, listen, we don't tolerate this, whatever's going on. You try to mediate as best possible, but you have to draw that clear line in the sand that we are the American Embassy. And as the direct hire and representative of the United States government, there are certain standards beneath which we do not go and we do not accept. We have no control of what goes on outside the mission, but while you're under the purview of the mission, this is what's acceptable and this is what's unacceptable. So my experience generally has been fed by my previous time working with the Department of the Army as a DA civilian, and the relationships and the friendships that I built over the years. And you find that now I've been working since I left the Department of the Army, now 15 years. There are still people that I interface with. Italians when I worked in Italy, and the French people, they're Sri Lankans, friends on Facebook, emails, birthday parties, photographs of their children growing up. You almost form another community aside from your friends and family in the more traditional sense. So it feeds who you are, and it heightens and increases the knowledge of these different cultures of what being American is. Every country I go to, I always try to go speak at a local school because I like to let it be known that yes, there are people who look like me that do this job that you think is carved out for other people, and there are opportunities for you who may not necessarily look like the guy you saw before you, but the opportunity does exist. There are ways to advance your career. There are ways to make yourself more useful to society, if you will. So yeah, it's very useful.
Thank you so much for providing that amazing feedback, Diplomat Natoma. Diplomat Jeffrey.
Yeah, I'll just, I mean, a lot of it's already been said, and so I'll just kind of piggyback. RSO is one of the unique specialties that we have a large outward-facing external relationship with host country, because we often have a big relationship with the host country police, security services, and in a lot of places, the intelligence service and the security services are one and the same. So we often have to foster relationships with those who are charged in that local country with supporting us. I think that, as it's been said, I think it's very, very important to build those personal relationships. I can tell you that oftentimes we have to, in some places, at least where I've worked, you have to separate, the American individual diplomat sometimes from the American policy. And I'll use, once again, I'm not speaking on behalf of the department, but I'll use Eritrea, for example, where traditionally we've had strained bilateral relationships. But there were still things as a security officer that I needed to accomplish at the embassy. And I found that simply building strong personal relationships with individuals, I was able to accomplish a lot of what I needed to accomplish. I can tell you that Botswana, Eritrea, even Syria, I built some very, very strong relationships outside of the embassy, because I believe that those relationships
Come on through, True.
All right, looks like Diplomat Natoma can't provide us with any tech assistance all the way from Japan. And I know your connection's going in and off, Diplomat Jeffrey, and it's totally okay. I think you gave a great response and great piggybacking to Diplomat Natoma from that big question. It's a big question. We can even have a series just on cultural competency. So thank you for responding and providing that insight. And so I'll move into the most exciting questions that our members are typically waiting for, and that's the debunking the myths. You guys actually debunked quite a few myths as we had this conversation. And so I'll give you guys an opportunity to go through each of you all to just share 2 more myths that you think that we need to debunk, specifically as it pertains to working as a foreign service specialist. So Diplomat Walker, we'll start with you, then we'll move to Diplomat Natoma, and then Diplomat Jeffrey, you can follow with that as well too. And also for time, we're sticking for time. So this event will close in 5 minutes. We're actually a little bit over. So thank you to our diplomats for the additional time frame as well too.
Yeah. My 2 myths that I would bring up are, number 1, that we have some sort of diplomatic community lets us do whatever we want. This is not true at all. Pay your parking tickets, everything. The other is that that we can get Americans out of any trouble they get themselves into anywhere, anytime. No, this is not true. I've been the person answering the phone call in the middle of the night. And if you are hours away in some country or city that I'm not even sure why you're there on vacation, you're gonna have to call the local police. I'm sorry. I want everyone watching this to know that I'm not coming to get you. And this is a myth.
That's a good one. That one comes up quite a bit. So I'm glad that you are probably the third diplomat now in our series that's let our participants know that no, you do not, you need to pay your parking tickets. There must be something with the parking tickets because multiple of you guys have brought that up. Diplomat Natuma, what's two myths that you would like to debunk about being a foreign service specialist?
Honestly, I really don't know. Maybe I've lived a sheltered life, a sheltered existence, but I did have 2 tickets to pay in 2 different countries. So I do attest to the fact that you do have to pay your parking tickets. I guess, yeah. So you are an American citizen overseas and your rights and privileges do exist as an American citizen, but you have to follow local laws. I mean, it's just, that doesn't put you above anyone else. If you are wrong, you are wrong. If you're wrong in the US, likely you're going to be wrong wherever you're living. So I don't know if it's so much a myth as much as if you are working in this capacity, try not to have a chip on your shoulder because it doesn't belong there. You know, you're a human being just like anyone else. Yes, you are in a prestigious slot as a diplomat, but there's a fine line between abusing what privilege you think you have and actually just being a human being. Just be a decent person and just do your job and move on.
I trust our aspiring diplomats are good people. And so they won't have to worry about that. Diplomat Jeffrey, what are 2 myths that you would like to debunk?
One, I would say, and no slight to my colleagues who've been to some stereotypically great places around the world, but I would say one of the biggest myths is that you can have a really good, fulfilling and great time at some of the places that are traditionally considered more hard or hardship places. I will say that I've probably enjoyed the camaraderie and the friendships that I've made in some of the most difficult assignments than I have at some of the, what we would traditionally say, more cushy assignments. So that's one thing that I'd like to throw out. And the second thing is, you know, I've already talked about the fact that you don't have to, for DS, you don't have to come from a military or law enforcement background. But in addition to that, you can come from any major. Don't think that you have to major in political science or economics or criminal justice. You can come into DS with an arts major. You can come with a graphic design major, IT. We accept any major, and we don't. There's no prejudice based on what you study.
That's great. I'm glad you shared about the diversity in the training background. That's often a big question we get on whether or not, do I need to specialize? Do I need to get a political science degree or foreign affairs? Do I need to get an advanced degree? And one thing that I love that Diplomat Kearney actually talked about earlier was that as an FSO, there aren't any requirements, education requirements, but as specialists, there are. So if folks are looking to go into foreign service specialists as a diplomat, I hope I'm saying that correctly, then that's where the specializations, I guess pun intended, will make the most sense for that. So thank you for sharing those 2 myth debunks. There's been quite a few questions in our chat box, and I thank Diplomat Kearney for answering most of them. So thank you for that. One of the questions that it's also recurring that I've seen, not only in our chat box, but also in our registration, was regarding qualifications. So we've had probably over 30 different qualification questions, but this one's specific regarding, and maybe perhaps Natoma, you can answer this, but it's regarding, you know, they're a current US citizen and they want to know if they have dual citizenship, would that impact them negatively in joining the foreign service?
So the answer, as my State Department colleagues would attest to, is it depends. It always depends. There's never one flat answer to my knowledge. Um, It obviously, if you are only an American citizen, it makes the security clearance portion a little bit easier, one would think. But it would also depend on which country you are dual citizen of, and what are your affinities and ties to that country. So the investigative process is something that Diplomat Clifton can speak to more. So what they're looking for as far as the adjudication of your clearance, but flatly it depends. With respect to the I don't know, what was I supposed to answer what the qualifications are for the tech IMS or just the FSO citizenship question?
This one was more targeted around the citizenship question. So I think you did a good job of answering that. So thank you. And because of time, so as I've shared with many of you for this program, we're actually are collecting all of the questions and answers to translate into a greater FSO 101 publication. And so if you guys have missed some of the questions, or maybe your question wasn't necessarily answered, we're going to send that bulk of questions. Sorry, distinguished guests who decided to join us. We're not gone yet, there's more. We will connect with you at a later date, early in 2022, so you have an opportunity to enjoy the break. But just to kind of look at some of those questions and to see if there's any more that you can answer, so that when we compile that publication, it'll be as robust and comprehensive as possible. And so the final question that I would like to ask all of you so we can wrap up today's session is, if there's one thing that you wish you would have known then that you know now, coupled with compound questions, it's the attorney in me, why do you continue to serve America in this prestigious position? And we'll start with you, Diplomat Jeffrey.
I'll just say I continue to serve simply because I thoroughly enjoy getting up and going to work every day. I tell people oftentimes, find a career that you would do for free if money was not the object. And for me, DS has been that. It's been an ability to serve. It's been an ability to travel. It's been an ability to learn languages and see the world. So that's definitely the reason that I learned that I love this job. One thing that I wish I had known then, I just wish I had had a better understanding of the department at large. I knew about RSO work, and I have thoroughly enjoyed being an RSO, but I had no real clue of other careers within the State Department when I joined DS. So that's one thing that I wish I had, at least had known a little bit more about, 15 years ago.
Thanks so much for sharing. How about yourself, Diplomat Natomo? What's one thing you wish you would have known then that you know now? And why do you continue to serve our government in your amazing position?
One thing that I wish I knew, I knew then that I know now. So I've always had an affinity to work in IT and technology. So I wish that earlier on in my career track, I would have known about the opportunities that are offered by the Department of State to recruit potential talent into the IT field. One of which is the Foreign Affairs IT Fellowship, which I'm really keen on speaking about, which basically covers 2 years of tuition and gives you a stipend of $37,000 a year while you're going to school full time, along with 2 internships on your last 2 years. So your junior year and your senior year, and or if you're doing a graduate degree, both years of your graduate degree. The stipend is, in my opinion, extremely generous. The internship provides you an opportunity to work in close proximity with the IT specialists in DC for 1 year. And then the second year, you go overseas and work at an embassy to see real-time operations. And to culminate all of that, once you're done and you're graduated, you now sign on to do 5 years as a foreign service specialist in the IT cone. And so basically, in essence, you're guaranteed a job upon completion. Of course, you have to maintain a 3.2 and above GPA and be in good standing, this, that, and all the other ancillary things that come along with it. I wish I'd known that then, because I would have taken real advantage of it to this point. Now, why do I continue to serve in the Foreign Service again, I view my work in IT as a calling. I like the idea of being able to live overseas and serve the country and experience things that ordinarily my peers back in the US don't really get to experience. Yes, they make infinitely more money than I am currently making, but they do not have, in my opinion, the rewarding experience of being able to talk about vacationing in the Maldives for a weekend, going spearfishing off of the coast of Maldives or Sri Lanka. My wife and I never truly had a honeymoon, but our first assignment, we were in Sri Lanka and we were able to go to Trincomalee. When I'm back in the US and I'm talking with other FSOs and we're having just a general conversation about our shared life experience, to someone who may not know the context within which we're talking, it almost sounds as though we're bragging, because they're like, okay, so what, you think you're better than someone? No, but this is the factual fact. Just yesterday I was in Paris, and tomorrow I'm in Jerusalem. You know, you're doing all these things and you think about it retrospectively, and I am in awe in the things that I have experienced to date, and there's still so much more to come ahead of me. I'm constantly, look, I'll be an evangelist for this for however long I need to be. This has been the best decision of my life to date. I love it. I love it. I love it.
That is powerful. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, your testimonial as to why you continue to serve our amazing country. Diplomat Walker, what's one thing that you wish you knew then?
The thing that I would tell the
And
person
how would
that
you
first joined,
like to, why do you continue to serve this amazing country?
the thing I wish I knew then is just how that it's not to stress about what comes next. And in the first few years, I spent a lot of time planning and plotting things out for years in advance. And really everything has worked out really well. Things worked out for the best, and I think it usually does. Whether you land the next cushy post or not, it's going to work out just fine. There's always going to be something to enjoy about whatever assignment or country you land in. And the reason I continue to serve is that I can't imagine finding another career or another job that I'd want to do for the rest of the next 20 years. I don't think that I'll be doing this for 20 years, but there's nothing I could enjoy that I would enjoy as much. There's a constant learning, constant growing, constant growth, and so many opportunities and so many ways to change. You can have 3 different careers in one in the Foreign Service. So it's a great deal.
Thank you so much for sharing. And last but certainly not least, Foreign Service Officer Kearney. What's one thing that you know now that you wish that you knew then? And why do you continue to serve and continue to come back and support this FSO 101 series? Thank you.
Well, thank you for conceiving it, and it's wonderful. I think that the two are linked for me. I wish I had known how proud my country was going to make me before I started. I expected to be the perpetual voice of dissent. I was going to strike a mighty blow for all the things that's just wrong with foreign policy. And the fact that you have this opportunity to be at the table in the room where it happened, and you can bring your voice to whatever's being discussed, it's incredible. This organization values dissent in a way that most other organizations don't. The only other thing that really comes close to it is the Supreme Court. But you get to come to the table, throw it all out there, hash it out, have a 360 of an issue, look at all the equities, and then someone's going to make the decision. There's going to be a decision. You're going to fall behind it and support said decision. But the fact that it's a deliberative organization, not every agency can be that way, clearly, because that's just not the structure of some agencies. But the State Department has built into it this process of being deliberative purposely, and I appreciate that. And I continue to serve for the same reason. I think it's important. My perspective matters. My little Black girl from a small town in Florida perspective matters, because they might miss something if I don't speak up. And so that's all of that is what sort of goes into making sure that we continue to nudge this country that we all love towards this really wonderful ideal. There's nothing wrong with our ideals. I talk about my son a lot. So I fall short of my ideals as a parent daily, like maybe several times daily. I don't know, he would probably have a list. But just because I fall short of my ideals as a parent doesn't mean that I necessarily suck as a parent. And I think it's very much the same way with the United States. There's nothing wrong with our ideals. Our ideals are kind of pristine. Do we fall short of our ideals? Yeah, a lot. And so someone has to be there to continue to sort of keep nudging us towards the greatness of our ideals. And they would miss something, frankly, if my perspective was not in that discussion as we continue to move forward. So I know we're short on time. I just want to, there's something that I have seen repeatedly in this job as a recruiter, and that is that Black and brown folks tend to feel like we need to be, amazing and super more than we already are. And what I want people to know is you are more than enough right now. You can apply for these jobs. Look at the requirements. Do I meet those requirements? We're not kidding. We're not asking for extra stuff. If you have extra stuff, that's gravy. If you have the requirements, let's have a discussion about how you start this process. Because frequently I will hear people who are amazing, but they still feel like they need to pile on some extra, amazing. And so let's talk about the fact that you are more than enough right here, right where you are, if you want to start this journey.
Wow, how powerful. You are more than enough. And I love that you talked about the importance of diversity of perspectives. Our founder, Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins of WCAPS, she believed that global issues demanded a variety of perspectives. And we continue to honor her for seeing fit to create such a forum to allow, global advocacy and diplomacy and so many more of our working groups to not only unite women of color, but also men of color. It's a safe space and an ecosystem for all of us to not only meet each other, but to exchange insights, practices, to sponsor each other, get us to the next level in our careers, but then ultimately unite to change the world for the better place, but doing so where we can represent our country in the best light possible. So I thank all of you for taking the time. Thank you for the privilege for taking extra time. I know Diplomat Timu, you're in Japan, Diplomat Walker and Jeffrey and Diplomat Kearney are with me in DC, but we have dinner, right? And some other things to handle. And so I truly appreciate all of you for your time today. And I know our participants also appreciated this session as well. So with that, we close today's program. Again, my name is Maritza Adonis, Global Advocacy and Diplomacy Chair for WCAPS. We look forward to seeing you at our next session next month. It is in the chat box below. And if you have questions, we will cut the program, but we'll leave this room open for the next 7 minutes to allow for Q&A and mix and mingle with our participants. But of course, our distinguished diplomats, you're more than happy to log off. Thank you so much and have a great night, everyone.